Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very well-known, accomplished, and respected trauma psychologist and an author from San Diego, USA, Dr. Kirsten Harrison. Kirsten, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Harrison is a trauma psychologist. She's also a board certified expert in PTSD. She's also an author, co-author of a book titled I, Shauna, the story of a homeless intersex woman who inspired a community. So, Dr. Kirsten, my first question to you, please tell me about your journey. How did your studies at institutions at UCLA, Georgetown, and Harvard shape your perspective on trauma and healing?
Uh, Great question. I've been in the field for many years. It'll date me, but I'm almost 60, and I started kind of going to all the conferences and obviously studying psychology at Georgetown and doing research at UCLA. Started that in the early 80s. And so I've seen the field change quite a bit in that time. Topics that used to be more taboo aren't taboo anymore.
Yeah.
When eventually I became interested also in near-death experiences and how those people shared experiences that overlapped with what people talked about when they survived very traumatic childhood experiences. It was really hard to get research on any of it. And of course, now I'm so heartened to know that these days it's much more out there and that people don't have to feel like they have to hide in the shadows.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And was there a defining moment early in your career that confirmed you were on the right path?
Oh, many. So it kind of started, my high school sweetheart had been adopted from a very well-meaning family in the Midwest, but he had lived in Bogota, Colombia in an orphanage and then on the streets when he was a child. So I had no idea what post-traumatic stress was about until I watched him go through so much trauma and abreactions and all of these different symptoms that didn't make much sense to me as a 17-year-old, but I started diving into the world of trauma studies. And then my brother did tragically die in an accident a few years later, which is a very defining moment for my
Yeah.
family, but it very much gave me a much broader scope within which to understand trauma, resilience, survival, post-traumatic growth and thriving. And that's when I started also attending lots of conferences with near-death survivors.
Wow. What an amazing journey. And tell me, what are some of the common misconceptions you have encountered about people who are going through a trauma recovery?
Yeah, so back in the 80s, it was very common for people to have these very fantastical memories. And some of them were absolutely true, of
Mm.
course. Others were more of what we call a screen memory, which was it was much harder for them to face the true reality, which was maybe that the trauma was within their own families. And so a lot of damage was done with the false memory syndrome that made people believe that maybe they were making these things up, maybe they weren't to be believed. And so we had to really double down in our efforts, especially in the inpatient units in the hospital with very severe traumatic experiences, to really understand that it wasn't about the facts per se, it was how someone perceived the trauma and how to change the impact that it had on their lives by growing from the inside out, not through the facts so much as but through being able to re-regulate their nervous system.
Hmm.
So I would say over time, the field itself has done a lot of shifting and
Yeah.
twists and turns.
Yeah.
But if you're just present and there to witness somebody's healing and just offer guidance as a
Mhm.
humanitarian, that never goes out of style.
Hmm. Very well said. Thank you. How do you see the link between trauma, creativity, and resilience? And give me an example if you can.
Oh, I can't tell you the amount of clients that I've had that are unbelievable artists. I mean, the creativity and the will to survive the unthinkable and how that got expressed, whether it was through traditional kind of art forms or, poetic verbiage, it was really unbelievable to me. I have so many friends who have, become friends over the years that I originally noted at the hospitals, who were just incredible artists. Creativity is very much linked, because when you're told that you can't tell something, the child finds creative ways to express it that it's telling without talking. And so creativity takes on a whole new platform.
Right, right. Well said. And what are some signs that someone might still be carrying unresolved trauma without realizing it?
Yeah, that's a complicated one, because trauma is so biopsychosocial in nature. So you might have a biological predisposition to maybe coping a certain way through dissociation or something, or anxiety, and then you have a psychological environment, early trauma in the life, in the familial life, or out somewhere in the world, and then you have a social environment that might not be ideal, and then all of a sudden the person will have these symptoms that flare up. But for some people, they're able to push it down. It's similar to people who grew up maybe in homes with alcoholics or addiction. They might have a part that is very overachieving, that might do okay at work for a while. And so the trauma gets masked. And so sometimes it's other life crises that all of a sudden bring the trauma to the fore. And then that's when there's kind of a whole ego collapse. And that's when it becomes really difficult sometimes to not become aware of what they've been carrying. However, even in those situations, at the time of total surrender, we still have a much greater force that's sort of helping us keep it together and caring for us, even in that.
Yeah.
So it's hard to sometimes identify in some of these maybe overachievers or people who are incredibly they seem very productive and are here and now, yet on the personal relationships might be faltering, or something else might be going on. They might be self-medicating with substances. So it's sometimes hard for somebody to identify.
Amazing.
But there's always help. That's the part I always want to get across. There's always help.
Correct. Absolutely. You've also worked with near-death experiences. What do such cases reveal about the human psyche and resilience?
It's beautiful. It's such a rewarding work. And the human psyche can withstand the most horrendous experiences and still somehow come out triumphant. It's a victorious something built into our survival, built into our DNA, that we will go for it no matter what. And so when I was working with people who had severe childhood abuse, let's say, for example, they would often talk about leaving their bodies and maybe going up on a playground and playing with angels, or being somewhere else when they were being abused, the body was being abused. Well, near-death experiencers talk about the same thing, that when the body was trying to be resuscitated, that their soul was elsewhere. And so that level of resilience of the soul coming back was something that I could then use to help the trauma survivors, because the near-death experiencers, after a period of having to try to integrate what just happened to them and maybe not being believed during that time, after a period of time, they came back with so much light and so much love and hope and positivity that it helped me carry that over to the trauma clients and help them bridge that gap that they tried to get to in their own strength and recovery. So it's just been an incredible journey listening to the people talk about what they've been through.
I know, and must be so much learning for you as well.
Oh, yeah.
You worked also with survivors of complex PTSD and dissociative identity disorder.
Yeah.
What unique challenges do you see these conditions present in therapy?
So certain kinds of PTSD, for instance, when I did the research at UCLA, there was a lot of childhood trauma with cancers, like brain tumors, and how they survived the treatment. And then if they were lucky enough to survive all of that, they had a lot of PTSD afterwards because of what they had been through and how early they had to contemplate their mortality. So there was that kind of recovery and helping them find the beauty back in life and the small things, and to trust that they would be around long enough to experience it. And then with dissociative identity disorder, there are always parts inside called internal self-helpers. And these internal self-helpers act as sort of a human divine bridge and
Mm,
an ally to help keep the person functioning forward, even when
mm,
all of this splitting has occurred. So
mm.
in therapy, you get this energetic sense when certain parts are coming out, and you just
Right.
feel like they help teach you how to best heal them. And it's like they have their own shaman inside of them
Mm,
that
mm,
helps guide the therapy along.
mm. And how do you see the relationship between trauma and spiritual
Mm.
awakening?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like people who have gone to the edge of chaos, like in mathematics, fractal base and boundaries, have the most incredible order after. And it's like these survivors are teaching us so much because they've gone to that edge,
Mm,
and they are just unbelievable teachers. And I sometimes say, I wrote about it in the book that I just wrote, I sometimes say that people who have gone to the edges of what we would call sanity and insanity actually are our biggest spiritual teachers. And that if we
mm,
can just listen to some of the things that they have found, the synchronicities that happen, the ability to tune to energy, the way in quantum physics, like they
mm,
can just take it all on, that non-locality with consciousness. It's if we just need to listen to the people whose
mm,
voices are in the margins, because they
mm.
really do have so much to teach us.
Wow, wow. Working with deeply traumatized individuals must be emotionally demanding. How do you protect your own mental and emotional well-being?
Oh, good question again. So I did take many years off to raise kids. I started doing groups with women that were considered the worried well, moms that were adjusting to empty nest and things like that, that were it's a little bit less super traumatic and on the edge. I felt like it wasn't helping my kids to come home and bring a lot of this trauma back home. And it was also important for me to find that light again, because part of what makes a good trauma therapist is somebody who's very congruent and
Mm,
who can sort of really feel what's going on with also still having effective boundaries. And that's really hard when you have little kids around and you're kind of, trying to be very, very open hearted and present. So I took a little time, and I think it's really imperative that all people that are helping other people realize that compassion fatigue is real. You
mm.
need to care for yourself first so that you can become a long-term healer of somebody, and that it is
Right.
okay to model that self-care.
Very interesting. Do you believe healing is ever complete, or is it a lifelong process?
Ah, life is so difficult and throws so many twists and turns
True,
at us. I
true.
believe that growth is always happening, and that
Mm,
healing from some very acute events,
mm,
I mean, there may not be like a simple line to draw and say, okay, you're over the grief or
mm,
whatever the trauma might be. I think acute trauma can definitely dissipate over time, and it becomes part of that growing life experience that spirals upwards and outwards into a much broader understanding of life, in the same way that we mature through all sorts of life experiences. So I would say that we're always learning, we're always growing. And I do believe, I have seen with my own eyes, people have
mm.
incredible post traumatic gains and the things that they've done with their lives. In fact, Shauna, the person I wrote the book about, is a
Mm,
perfect example of that. So,
mhm.
yes.
And how has the field of trauma psychology evolved in the past few decades? And where do you see this heading?
So it beautifully in the past few decades, it's gotten to a point where people are understanding that there is a spiritual component to healing. People were very scared back in the day of adding any terms of spirituality because they were scared it would delegitimize the science. But over
Mm,
time, they've realized that it's really an important component, and it sort of brings an overarching meaning to everything. So
mm,
that's incredibly heartening. I also have loved all the functional brain MRI studies and all the different things that are really verifying things that we sort of had to just go on a client's word
mm,
before. And now we
mm,
can really see that there are brain changes that happen, for instance, when someone's switching into different parts and identities.
mm,
And just through listening to so many people over all these decades talk about healing, and then with all the sensory therapies that have come online that have become so important, the somatic healing and listening to the body and how
mm,
the body speaks, it's an incredible evolution. And I think
Right.
that it's just going to get better and better.
Absolutely. One more question, and then I want to move to your book. If you could
Sure.
change one thing about how society views trauma, what would it be and why?
I would just say let go of the fear, show compassion. You never know what somebody has gone through. And especially with more of the brain based, like schizophrenia, bipolar, with people get a little bit more scared. I feel like education is key. And just again, using that energy to try to expand the field of knowledge, but also compassion is just so important. And so,
Mhm.
you know, when somebody struggled, really try to do something to be a day maker, make their lives better.
Hmm.
Try to understand that, you just got really blessed that maybe that wasn't you going through that at that time.
Hmm.
So,
Amazing. Let's now talk about your book. I have a few questions for you. You're the co-author of
okay.
a book titled I, Shauna, the story of a homeless intersex woman who inspired a community. How did you first meet Shauna and what inspired you to co-author a story, her story?
Okay, so my ex-husband and I had just moved to La Jolla, California, a cute little seaside village near San Diego. And he was a retired global tennis pro. And so, and my ex-husband had long dreadlocks, was Trinidadian American. And all of a sudden he saw Sean at the time, 6'5", African American, very muscular, sitting at the tennis courts. And he thought, oh, okay, that person looks like a great person to have a tennis match with.
Hmm.
Well, a month later, all of a sudden Sean was now presenting as Shauna with a long
Hmm.
flowy wig, bright
Wow.
bikini tops, skirts. And so I was like, the psychologist and humanitarian in me was really interested in what her story was.
Hmm.
So it became kind of apparent that maybe she didn't have a lot of resources. I know that she was going to Goodwill a lot to get new outfits, but I didn't know at that point she was homeless. So I one day brought her a Starbucks and I just said, hey, Shauna, like, tell me about your story. And so we started talking. And then I just got this deep respect for how, for 30 years, she had helped all the businesses in town, run errands for them. But I also became aware that she had the possibility of schizophrenia. And at that time, I've never worked with her clinically, but I've been her friend for 10 years.
Hmm.
And so one night it was raining hard. She was outside shivering. And I thought, oh my gosh, like I have to get her housing. This is ridiculous that she's suffering so much. So I called the local paper. I put her up in a hotel. We ran a GoFundMe. We got an angel investor. And now for 10 years, I mean, we text, 100 times a day, it seems like. I've helped her learn how to text, reconnected with her family. I've been supporting her for the last 8 years, but for 2 years, the community showed up in huge amounts to help support her and get her off the streets.
Amazing.
So it's been and now she's off, traveling all the time. I took her to Europe for 3 weeks. She had never left the country. And I was helping her go to all the pride parades, the Euro Pride, because she was born with something called intersex, which is ambiguous genitalia. You're kind of, the old terminology might have be hermaphrodite, where you're a little bit of
Yeah.
both. And
Mhm.
she was very confused growing up. And then with mental illness, it just became very confusing. But the reason that it was so important now for her to use her voice is to be able to tell people, look, never give up.
Correct.
Tomorrow could be a day that you have no idea what could happen. She's
Correct.
very happy. She's successful now. We wrote a book together about her story to help her get her voice amplified.
Hmm.
So it's been a beautiful journey, and you
Wow.
never know what will happen around the corner. That's something that I will
Absolutely.
never stop saying.
Absolutely. What an amazing story. Uh,
Yeah.
Kirsten, your book challenges outdated medical practices.
Yeah.
What change do you most hope that your book will spark?
Well, Shauna and I have two different ones. So for her, it's stopping intersex surgeries, which are surgeries that doctors and parents take on children who are born with a little bit of ambiguity and they decide the biological sex for the child, and that causes a lot of damage later on. And so Shauna is very, very adamant. We wrote a thing for the United Nations, the Human Rights Commission, on this op-ed on how it's so important to not feel coerced into making a decision for
Hmm.
your child. So that is her big platform that we presented throughout Europe. And for me, it's very much about Shauna walks 12 to 15 miles a day,
Hmm.
walks a day, and she calls it her mood walk therapy. It's the way she manages her internal stress. So she does not opt for psychiatric meds. She feels the side effects as an athlete are too hard on her body. And she's had family members die young of cardiac issues. So she wasn't willing to take the risk. So I think for me, it's that everybody's healing is different, and that some people will heal through exercise and, taking long walks, and other people will heal in different ways. And to be clear, she still definitely struggles with schizophrenia. She definitely still is impacted by voices and difficulties. However, she's learned to manage that in untraditional ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I just applaud that, because that's what works for her. And so I think we need to stop passing judgment on people. Like, why don't they just get help? And realize that people are really trying their best,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And my last question for you, Kirsten, how has working with Shauna shaped your own understanding of dignity and inclusion?
Dignity. I love that word. That is the most important thing that's happened in 10 years, is that she feels like she has her dignity back. And I feel like I was always that kid on the playground that was bringing everybody into the group. So I think inclusion is hugely important. A sense of belonging is always important. It's vital to feel like the voices that have been marginalized, that we try to understand them a little bit more. And what are they trying to tell us? What can they teach us? And then the dignity that comes from just respectfully interacting with somebody. If somebody's asking you for money, you may not, give it on the street if that's not your inclination, but you could smile, you could make the person feel human again just for a moment. So I think that that's everything.
Very interesting. And on that note, Kirsten, I just want to say, what an incredible conversation this has been with you. We covered a lot of very interesting ground with your deep understanding of trauma on the subject of trauma. We also had a fascinating conversation about your book, Shauna. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Oh, thank you so much. And you're doing incredible work. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website, www.tbcy.in, to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.